The vast emptiness of space had never felt so crowded. Thousands of alien warships stretched across the darkness like a deadly constellation, their hulls gleaming with the cold light of distant stars. Each vessel was the size of a city, bristling, with weapons that could crack planets in half. The Zephyrian Empire had arrived at humanity's doorstep, and they had not come to negotiate. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the World Breaker, watching the primitive human colonies through the massive view screen. His 6 arms moved gracefully across the command interface, each motion deliberate and practiced. He had done this dance 847 times before, and it always ended the same way: fear, begging, surrender. The Admiral's scales shifted from deep purple to a satisfied gold as he surveyed the human settlements, pathetic little outposts clinging to asteroids and moons, their metal structures looking like toys compared to his mighty fleet. These creatures called themselves the dominant species of their sector, yet their largest space station could fit inside his ship's cargo bay. "Begin the standard broadcast," Kethvar commanded, his voice resonating through the bridge like distant thunder. His subordinates immediately complied, having performed this ritual countless times across the galaxy. The transmission burst outward from every ship in the fleet, carrying the Empire's ultimatum to every human device capable of receiving it. The message was simple and had been refined over centuries of conquest. First, a display of overwhelming force. Energy beams lanced out from the Zephyrian ships, vaporizing several unmanned asteroids in brilliant flashes of light. The message was clear without words. Then came Kethvar's voice, translated into the crude human languages by the Empire's most advanced computers. "Humans of this insignificant sector, you stand before the might of the Zephyrian Empire. We have conquered 847 star systems. We have brought order to 1,000 worlds. Your resistance is not just futile, it is mathematically impossible." On the human colonies, people stopped what they were doing. Miners put down their tools. Farmers left their hydroponic gardens. Children pressed their faces against viewing. Ports watching the alien fleet with wide eyes. But there was something strange in their expressions. Not the terror Kethvar expected, but something else entirely. The Admiral continued his speech, delivered with the confidence of absolute power. "You have 72 standard hours to surrender unconditionally. Your leaders will present themselves for processing. Your worlds will be integrated into the Empire. Your people will serve the greater good of galactic civilization. This is not a negotiation. This is inevitability." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. On 847 previous occasions, this moment had been followed by frantic communications from the target species, desperate pleas for mercy, offers of tribute, attempts at bargaining. Always the same pattern of fear and submission. But the human communication channels remained eerily quiet. Kethvar's scales flickered with annoyance. Perhaps these primitives were too stupid to understand the gravity of their situation. He had encountered a few species like that before, though none quite this dense. "To demonstrate our resolve," he continued, "witness the fate of defiance. The World Breaker's main cannon charged with a sound like singing crystal. Energy gathered at its tip, bright enough to temporarily blind anyone looking directly at it. The weapon fired, and a beam of pure destruction reached out across space to strike a small human mining station. The structure didn't just explode, it simply ceased to exist, vaporized down to its component atoms. The alien crew waited for the inevitable response: screaming, panic transmissions, offers of surrender. Instead, silence stretched across the void like a held breath. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a single transmission came from the largest human station. The voice was calm, almost conversational, with the casual tone of someone declining dinner plans. "Zephyrian Empire, we have received your ultimatum and carefully considered your generous terms. After thorough deliberation, we respectfully decline your offer." Kethvar's scales shifted to a confused orange. In 847 conquests, no species had ever used the word generous to describe their ultimatum. Most couldn't even form coherent sentences after witnessing his demonstration of power. "Perhaps you did not understand," he replied, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "This was not an offer. This was a statement of fact. You will surrender, or you will be eliminated. The human response came even quicker this time, and there was something almost cheerful in the voice. Oh, we understood perfectly, Admiral. We've been watching your empire expand for quite some time now. We know exactly how this usually goes. The thing is, we're not particularly interested in being anyone's servants. Thanks anyway, though. The bridge of the World Breaker fell silent except for the soft humming of machinery. Cathvar's 6 arms trembled slightly as his scales cycled through colors that had no names, emotions that had no precedent in his long military career. In all his centuries of conquest, no species had ever simply said no. Not like this. Not with such casual indifference to overwhelming force. These humans were either the bravest species in the galaxy or the most foolish. Time would tell which. The first explosion lit up the darkness of space like a newborn star. Colony 7, humanity's largest mining operation in the Kepler belt, simply vanished in a brilliant flash of white light, where moments before massive extraction platforms had pulled precious metals from asteroid cores. Now only glowing debris drifted through the void. Admiral Cathvar watched from his command bridge, his scales shifting to a bewildered shade of green. What are they doing? He muttered, his 6 arms dancing across sensor controls. The readings made no sense. The humans had just destroyed their own infrastructure, vaporizing equipment worth more than some planets' entire economies. Before he could process what he'd witnessed, another flash blazed across the star system. Agricultural station Demeter, which had fed millions with its vast hydroponic farms, erupted in a cascade of fire and twisted metal. The explosion was so intense that it briefly outshone the local sun, sending shockwaves that rattled nearby ships in the Zephyrian fleet. "Sir," one of his officers called out, his voice tinged with confusion. "The humans are broadcasting something called Protocol Pyrrhus across all their networks." Cathvar's translator crackled to life, picking up fragments of human communications. Voices calm and determined, speaking to each other across the vast distances between worlds. Phoenix Base, beginning scorching sequence in 30 seconds. Aurora Station confirms initiating burn protocol now. Research Facility Prometheus purging all databases, going dark in 10 minutes. The Admiral's scales cycled through colors of disbelief. These creatures were destroying themselves rather than submit. It was madness. Pure, incomprehensible madness. In his centuries of conquest, he had never encountered anything like it. On the agricultural world of New Iowa, farmers moved with practiced efficiency through their endless fields of grain. But instead of harvesting their crops, they were setting them ablaze. Massive combines, repurposed with flamethrowers, rolled across golden wheat fields like mechanical dragons, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. The sky turned orange with the glow of burning harvests that could have fed entire star systems. Colony Administrator Chen stood on the observation deck of the main facility, watching his life's work turn to smoke. He had spent 20 years transforming this barren rock into a garden that rivaled Earth itself. Now he was burning it all down with his own hands. A younger colonist approached him, tears streaming down her face. "Administrator, the livestock have been evacuated to the underground shelters. The seed banks are secure in the deep vaults. But sir, watching all this burn, it feels like we're destroying everything we've ever built." Chen placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his eyes never leaving the burning fields. "No, kid, we're not destroying anything. We're just making sure the right people get to rebuild it." Across the system, research stations were implementing their own version of Protocol Pyrrhus. On Science Platform Atlas, researchers raced through corridors lined with quantum computers and experimental technology. But instead of fleeing, they were methodically wiping every database, melting every hard drive, and overloading every system with electromagnetic pulses. Dr. Patel, the station's chief scientist, stood before a massive quantum computer that represented decades of breakthrough research. His finger hovered over the final deletion key. "Computer, confirm total data purge of all research files." "Warning," the AI responded in its calm, synthetic voice. "This action will permanently delete all research data, including breakthrough, discoveries in faster-than-light travel, quantum weaponry, and dimensional physics. This action cannot be undone. Confirm deletion? Confirmed, Patel said without hesitation. Better it dies with us than serves them. The computer screens flickered and went dark, taking with them knowledge that could have advanced civilization by centuries. But in the depths of the station, hidden beneath layers of metal and stone, something else was happening. Devices that looked like simple maintenance equipment were quietly powering up, their true purpose known only to a select few. Admiral Kethvar watched world after world commit what appeared to be suicide. Mining colonies detonated their own fusion reactors, creating miniature suns that consumed everything within a 100-kilometer radius. Manufacturing worlds shut down their production lines and fed their own machinery into massive recycling furnaces. Even the humans' orbital defense platforms turned their weapons on themselves, creating spectacular fireworks displays as they tore themselves apart. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, his voice shaking slightly. We're detecting coordinated destruction across 43 human colonies. They're following some kind of predetermined pattern. Every facility is being destroyed in a specific sequence. The pattern was what puzzled Kethvar the most. This wasn't random destruction born of desperation. The humans were following a plan, a carefully orchestrated symphony of self-destruction that seemed to follow rules he couldn't understand. Each explosion happened at precisely timed intervals. Each facility was destroyed in a specific order. There was method to this madness, but he couldn't grasp what it might be. On the fortress world of Gibraltar Station, the last human stronghold began its own scorching sequence. Massive defense cannons that had guarded the system for generations turned inward, firing upon their own bases. Shield generators overloaded in spectacular cascades of energy. Even the mighty space elevators, engineering marvels that connected the planet to orbital platforms, were severed and sent crashing down in controlled demolitions. But in the deepest bunkers of each world, as the fires raged above and the explosions shook the ground, something else was stirring. Hidden machinery, disguised as everything from water pumps to air recyclers, began to hum with purpose. The humans weren't just destroying their worlds, they were preparing them. 3 weeks had passed since the humans burned their own worlds, and Admiral Kethvar was beginning to think he understood these strange creatures after all. They were simply insane. No rational species would destroy everything they had built rather than accept the Empire's rule. But insanity or not, their worlds were now his to claim. The Zephyrian occupation forces descended upon the scorched planets like vultures picking over bones. Massive troop transports, each carrying thousands of soldiers, touched down on the still smoking surfaces of former human colonies. The aliens emerged wearing environmental suits, their sensors scanning for any remaining resistance or valuable salvage. Colonel Vexitar led the first wave onto what had been the mining world of Colony 7. Through his helmet display, he could see nothing but twisted metal and glassed sand where the mining facilities once stood. His boots crunched on crystallized debris as he surveyed the wasteland. Pathetic, he muttered to his troops. These humans were even more primitive than our intelligence suggested. They couldn't even surrender properly. But as his engineering teams began deeper scans, something strange emerged in their readings. Beneath the surface devastation, the sensors detected vast hollow spaces, caverns that stretched for kilometers underground, connected by tunnels that formed an intricate web beneath the planet's crust. The humans, it seemed, had been busy diggers. "Sir," one of his technicians called out, pointing her scanner toward a collapsed mining shaft. "I'm getting power readings from down there. Significant energy signatures approximately 2 kilometers below the surface." Vexitar's interest peaked. Perhaps these humans had hidden some valuable technology after all. "Send down the excavation drones. If there's anything worth salvaging, I want it found." The mechanical diggers descended into the darkness, their lights cutting through the gloom as they followed the tunnel networks deeper underground. What they found defied all expectations. The caverns weren't natural formations or simple mining tunnels. They were engineered spaces, reinforced with advanced materials and lined with equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. On the agricultural world of New Iowa, Zephyrian scientists made an even more disturbing discovery. Beneath the burned fields and destroyed farms, they found chambers filled with strange cylindrical devices. Each cylinder was the size of a building, covered in crystalline components that pulsed with an eerie blue light. The energy readings were off the charts. "What are these things?" demanded Science Commander Thelanis as she examined the mysterious devices through her scanner. Her three-eyed gaze swept across readings that made no sense according to Zephyrian physics. "They're not weapons as we understand them. The energy patterns are completely foreign." Her assistant, a nervous young technician, stammered as he checked his instruments. "Commander, the resonance frequencies are identical across all 23 occupied worlds. Whatever these devices are, they're all synchronized to the same quantum signature." Similar discoveries were being made across every human world the Empire had claimed. On research stations, the Zephyrians found laboratories that went far deeper than the destroyed surface facilities. On manufacturing worlds, they uncovered assembly lines that had been producing mysterious components for decades. On fortress worlds, they found armories that contained weapons unlike anything in their databases. But the most unsettling discovery was the timing. Carbon dating and energy analysis revealed that these underground networks hadn't been built recently in response to the invasion. They were old. Some installations showed construction dates going back 50 years or more. The humans hadn't been preparing for any invasion. They had been preparing for this specific invasion by this specific enemy. Admiral Kethvar studied the reports flooding in from his ground forces with growing unease. His scales had shifted to a deep, worried blue that hadn't changed in days. "How could they have known?" he asked his intelligence officer. "Our expansion into this sector wasn't planned until 3 years ago. Yet some of these installations predate our arrival by decades." The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep in the underground networks of Gibraltar Station, Zephyrian archaeologists discovered a vast chamber filled with holographic displays. When activated, they showed detailed star charts tracking the Empire's expansion over the past century. Battle formations were analyzed, conquest patterns were mapped. Even Kethvar's own tactical preferences were documented with disturbing accuracy. The humans had been watching, learning, planning. Then, on the 24th day of occupation, everything changed in an instant. It began as a low humming that seemed to come from the planets themselves. The strange cylindrical devices in the underground chambers started glowing brighter, their blue light shifting to brilliant white. Across 23 worlds, the mysterious network that the humans had spent decades building finally revealed its true purpose. The quantum resonance bombs activated simultaneously. The first explosion wasn't visible. It happened in dimensions that Zephyrian science barely acknowledged existed. Reality itself seemed to hiccup as the quantum field surrounding each occupied world suddenly snapped into perfect synchronization. The effect rippled outward at faster-than-light speeds, creating a cascade of energy that existed in normal space and hyperspace at the same time. Kethvar felt the world breaker shudder around him as the wave hit his fleet. Alarms screamed across every ship as their shields simply vanished, drained of power by the quantum resonance effect. "Report," he bellowed, his 6 arms frantically working his command console. "Sir, our shield generators are offline across the entire fleet," his tactical officer shouted over the chaos. "The resonance effect is interfering with our power cores. We're losing structural integrity on all vessels." Through the massive view screen, Kethvar watched in horror as his mighty dreadnoughts began tearing themselves apart. The quantum effect wasn't just draining their shields, it was causing their own weapons to misfire, their hulls to buckle, and their engines to overload. Ships that had conquered hundreds of worlds were being destroyed not by enemy fire, but by their own systems failing catastrophically. The Devastator, one of his largest battleships, simply broke in half as its internal structure gave way. Planet Crusher exploded in a chain reaction that took out 3 nearby cruisers. Across the fleet, thousands of years of Imperial engineering crumbled like sandcastles before a tsunami. And in the depths of those scorched human worlds, hidden beneath the ash and ruin, automated systems quietly powered down. The trap had been sprung. The bait had been taken, and the hunters had become the hunted. The humans had been planning this moment for 50 years. Now finally it was time for the second phase of their plan to begin. The bridge of the World Breaker was a scene of chaos and sparking electronics. Half the lighting had failed, casting long shadows across twisted metal and shattered displays. Admiral Kethvar clung to his command chair as his flagship listed heavily to one side, its massive engines sputtering and dying. Around him, his crew worked frantically to restore basic life support, while damage reports flooded in from across his crippled fleet. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, her voice strained with disbelief. "We're receiving a transmission from the humans. It's coming from everywhere. Every destroyed world, every orbital platform, even from space itself." Kethvar's scales had turned a sickly gray, the color of defeat and confusion. His 6 arms trembled as he gestured toward the main screen. "Put it through. I want to hear what these creatures have to say now that they've destroyed us both." The view screen flickered to life, showing the face of an elderly human male. He sat calmly in what appeared to be a simple office, completely at odds with the devastation surrounding both fleets. Behind him, Kethvar could see star charts and tactical displays showing the current battle situation in real time. The human's expression was neither triumphant nor angry. Instead, he looked almost sad. "Admiral Kethvar," the human began, his voice carrying easily across the static-filled channel. "My name is Director Reynolds, and I represent the Human Defense Coordination Bureau. I believe you have some questions." Kethvar's mandibles clicked with rage and bewilderment. "Questions? You primitive savages just destroyed both our fleets. You've committed suicide on a galactic scale. What could you possibly hope to accomplish by murdering your own species?" Reynolds leaned back in his chair, a slight smile crossing his weathered features. "Murder our own species?" "Admiral, I think you misunderstand the situation. Let me show you something that might clarify things." The display behind Reynolds changed, showing footage from across the human worlds. But instead of the devastation Kethvar expected to see, the images showed something impossible. Beneath the scorched surfaces, massive blast doors were opening. From hidden underground cities, humans were emerging by the millions. Children played in vast subterranean parks. Farmers tended to hydroponic gardens in caverns that stretched for kilometers. Scientists worked in laboratories that made the surface facilities look like crude workshops. "Every human world you've occupied," Reynolds continued casually, "was built with 2 levels. What you saw on the surface was real, but it was also expendable. Our real cities, our real infrastructure, our real lives have been underground for generations. We've been preparing for your arrival for a very long time." Kethvar's scales shifted through colors that had no names as he processed what he was seeing. "Impossible. Our intelligence networks would have detected such massive construction projects. We've been monitoring this sector for decades." "Oh, you certainly have," Reynolds agreed with a chuckle. "In fact, we've been helping you monitor us. Every sensor reading your scouts collected, every intelligence report your spies filed, every piece of data you gathered about humanity was carefully crafted by us. We wanted you to see exactly what we wanted you to see. A primitive species with valuable resources and minimal defenses." The screen showed historical footage dating back centuries. Human deep space telescopes tracking Zephyrian fleet movements across distant star systems, underground facilities being carved out of solid rock by massive boring machines. Generations of human engineers working on projects whose true purpose was known only to a select few. "We've been watching your empire expand for over 300 years, Reynolds explained, his tone becoming more serious. "We studied every battle, analyzed every conquest, cataloged every weakness in your tactics and technology. The hegemony of Altair lasted 6 hours against your fleet. The crystal cities of Vega Prime fell in 4 days. The machine worlds of Proxima held out for almost a month. All of them followed the same pattern. They tried to fight you directly, using conventional tactics against conventional forces." Kethvar found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we learned from their mistakes," Reynolds replied. Every species you've conquered tried to match your strength with their strength. We decided to turn your strength into our weapon instead. Your quantum resonance scanners that make your shield so effective? We built our entire trap around that exact technology. Your tactical preference for overwhelming force? We used that to lure your entire fleet into range. Your standard occupation procedures? We spent 50 years preparing for every single step. The ranked display showed technical schematics that made Kethavar's head spin. Quantum resonance bombs designed specifically to interfere with Zephyrian shield technology. Underground networks positioned to channel energy in ways that would amplify the effect across multiple star systems. Even the timing of the human surrenders had been calculated to maximize the damage when the trap finally sprung. But the scorching, Kethavar protested weakly. You destroyed everything you had built. Reynolds shook his head. We destroyed everything we had built for you to see. Admiral, humanity has been building two civilizations simultaneously. One was bait, the other was a weapon. Every mining facility that exploded had a backup operation 3 kilometers underground. Every research station that burned its databases had already transferred the real data to quantum storage networks you couldn't detect. Every farm that burned its crops had vast underground agriculture systems that could feed 10 times the surface population. The screen now showed the true scope of human preparation. Beneath 23 worlds, vast industrial complexes were coming online. Factories that had been disguised as geological formations began producing weapons and ships. Shipyards hidden in asteroid fields started launching vessels that made the destroyed surface fleets look like toys. The most beautiful part, Reynolds continued, his eyes twinkling with something between pride and regret, is that you actually helped us build it. Every year you delayed your invasion gave us more time to prepare. Every tactical manual your traders sold to other species eventually found its way to us. Every battle you fought taught us more about how to defeat you. Kethavar slumped in his command chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what had happened. How long? He asked quietly. How long have you been planning this? The first planning committee was established 237 years ago, Reynolds replied. The underground construction began 180 years ago. The quantum resonance bombs were installed and began charging 74 years ago. And the bait cities, the ones you thought were our real civilization, were completed just 23 years ago, right around the time our scouts reported your expansion heading in our direction. The Admiral's scales had gone completely white, the color of shock so profound it bordered on system failure. You spent centuries preparing to destroy us? Reynolds stood up from his chair, and for the first time his expression hardened. Admiral, we spent centuries preparing to survive you. The destruction was just a side effect. You see, we learned something from studying all those conquered civilizations. They all made the same mistake. They thought like prey. They ran, they hid, they begged, they fought desperately. But prey doesn't survive predators by being better prey. He leaned toward the camera, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, of preparation and sacrifice. Prey survives by becoming the predator. The silence that followed Director Reynolds' revelation stretched across space like a funeral shroud. Admiral Kethavar sat motionless in his command chair, watching his once mighty fleet drift helplessly through the void. Ships that had terrorized 1,000 worlds now tumbled end over end, their hulls cracked open like broken eggs, their proud banners torn and burning. But in the depths of space, something new was stirring. From asteroid fields that had seemed empty for centuries, massive structures began to unfold. What had appeared to be simple mining operations revealed themselves as sophisticated shipyards, their surfaces peeling away to expose gleaming construction, bays filled with vessels unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. These weren't the crude human ships the Zephyrians had observed from a distance. These were predators, sleek and deadly, designed with 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge about galactic warfare. The first human battle group emerged from hidden bases in the Kepler belt, like sharks rising from deep water. Their ships moved with an alien grace that made even seasoned Zephyrian officers gasp in recognition of superior engineering. The lead vessel, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed even the Worldbreaker, transmitted a simple message across all frequencies. This is Captain Torres of the Human Liberation Fleet. All Zephyrian forces are ordered to stand down immediately. Any vessel that attempts to flee or resist will be destroyed without warning. HFY tried to respond, but his communications array was one of many systems that had failed during the quantum cascade. He could only watch helplessly as human ships surrounded the remnants of his fleet like wolves circling wounded prey. But these wolves weren't interested in finishing off their victims. Instead, they were broadcasting something else entirely. Across the galaxy, on worlds that had trembled under Zephyrian rule for generations, receivers picked up a new signal. It was broadcast in hundreds of languages, transmitted on frequencies that reached every corner of occupied space. The message was simple but revolutionary. People of the galaxy, this is the Human Liberation Command. The Zephyrian Empire's expansion has ended. Today, we begin the work of setting you free. On the crystal cities of Vega Prime, where the population had lived in fear for decades, crowds gathered around public screens to watch impossible footage. Human ships, emerging from hidden bases that nobody had known existed, were engaging Zephyrian garrison fleets across multiple star systems simultaneously. But instead of the brutal conquest they expected, something miraculous was happening. The humans were winning. Lieutenant Governor Kayla of Vega Prime watched from her administrative tower as human vessels swept through the orbital defense network that had kept her people captive for 30 years. The Zephyrian ships barely had time to raise their shields before human weapons, designed specifically to counter Imperial technology, tore through their formations like paper. "How is this possible?" she whispered to her aide, a young crystal being whose translucent skin shimmered with excitement. "The humans were just primitives. The Empire told us they were barely capable of spaceflight." Her aide's crystalline features sparkled with something that might have been laughter. "Governor, I think the Empire told us many things that weren't true." The same scenes were playing out across hundreds of worlds. On the machine planets of Proxima, where artificial intelligences had been enslaved to serve Imperial industry, human liberation fleets arrived with detailed plans for dismantling the control networks that held them captive. On the forest worlds of the Centauri cluster, where entire ecosystems had been strip-mined for Imperial expansion, human environmental engineers began immediately working to restore what had been destroyed. But the most remarkable thing wasn't the military victory. It was what the humans did next. Instead of claiming the liberated worlds for themselves, instead of establishing their own empire in place of the Zephyrian one, the humans did something unprecedented in galactic history. They gave the worlds back to their people and left. Director Reynolds, now broadcasting from a command ship that had emerged from a hidden base in the Alpha Centauri system, addressed the galaxy once more. "We know what it's like to face the choice between freedom and survival," he said, his weathered face showing the strain of centuries of preparation. "We know the desperation of watching everything you've built threatened by forces beyond your control. That's why we're not here to rule you. We're here to give you the chance to rule yourselves." The human fleet began what they called the Liberation Protocol. On world after world, they systematically dismantled Imperial infrastructure while carefully preserving everything that belonged to the local populations. Garrison fleets were destroyed or captured. Administrative centers were shut down. The vast network of tribute collection and resource extraction that had fed the Empire for centuries was methodically torn apart. But the humans left behind something else: knowledge, technical specifications for defensive systems, agricultural techniques that could restore damaged ecosystems, communication networks that allowed former Imperial subjects to coordinate their own defense against future threats. Most importantly, they left behind detailed information about every other predatory empire in the galaxy and how to recognize the warning signs before it was too late. Admiral Kethvar, now a prisoner aboard a human vessel, watched through a small porthole as his life's work crumbled around him. The empire that had seemed eternal was dissolving like sugar in rain. Worlds that had paid tribute for centuries were declaring their independence. Species that had cowered before Imperial might were building their own defense fleets using human-provided technology. "Why?" he asked his human guard, a calm woman who had treated him with more dignity than he had shown to any of his conquered subjects. "Why didn't you just take our place? Why give it all away?" The guard considered his question for a long moment before answering. Because, Admiral, we learned something important while we were preparing for your arrival. The thing about building a trap that can destroy an empire is that you have to be very careful not to become an empire yourself. We spent 3 centuries making sure we never forgot that we were fighting to stay free, not to make others serve us. Months later, as human ships returned to their hidden bases and underground cities, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. Former imperial worlds were forming new alliances based on mutual cooperation, rather than forced submission. Trade networks that had once funneled wealth to Zephyrian coffers now spread prosperity among dozens of species. Scientific research that had been hoarded by imperial scientists was shared freely, leading to breakthroughs that benefited everyone. The final irony was not lost on the humans themselves. In their desperate attempt to avoid conquest, they had accidentally become the galaxy's greatest liberators. In preparing to defend themselves, they had created the tools to free everyone else. In choosing to burn their own paradise rather than share it with tyrants, they had shown the galaxy that freedom was worth any sacrifice. And in the deepest archives of human space, carefully guarded and maintained, detailed records were kept of every lesson learned from the Zephyrian War. Because the humans knew something that the Empire had never understood, there would always be another predator somewhere in the vast darkness of space. And when it came, humanity would be ready.